Hello and welcome. So, you're looking at the new IFRS S1 sustainability standard and probably wondering, how do I actually apply this? Well, you are definitely not alone. The answer, as it turns out, is deeply connected to the SASB standards. And as we're about to see, using them isn't just a good idea, it's mandatory. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the main challenge that IFRS S1 presents. Then we'll uncover the mandatory link it has to SASB. After that, we'll decode the SASB architecture so you know what you're looking at, walk through a really practical example with an airline, and then tackle what to do with more complex business models. We'll wrap it all up with a simple compliance checklist. Let's get right into it. All right, first things first, the IFRS S1 challenge. This is really about setting the stage and understanding the new reporting landscape that you're now navigating. So here's the central question, isn't it? IFRS S1 gives you the big picture rules for sustainability reporting, but it is a pretty high-level framework. So what are you supposed to do when there isn't a specific IFRS standard for your particular industry? Where do you find the nitty-gritty practical details you actually need for your disclosures? Well, the good news is that IFRS S1 does not leave you hanging. The solution is actually built right into the standard itself, giving you a very clear path to follow. And this is absolutely crucial. IFRS S1 gives you a very clear hierarchy of guidance. It's not just a free-for-all. It's a structured path specifically designed to lead you to disclosures that are both relevant and comparable to your peers. And right here, this is the most important takeaway. The standard's exact wording in paragraph 55A is that an entity shall refer to and consider the applicability of the SASB standards. That little word, shall, is everything. It means this isn't optional guidance or a friendly suggestion. It's a required step in your compliance process, period. And it doesn't just stop at identifying the risks and opportunities. When it comes to the actual metrics, the what and how you're supposed to measure, paragraph 58A points you in the exact same direction. You're required to consider the metrics within the SASB standards, so both the topic and the specific measurement are tied directly to SASB. Okay, so we know we have to look at the SASB standards, but what are we actually looking at? Let's take a minute to decode the SASB architecture and really understand its different building blocks. Using the SASB standards is actually a pretty straightforward four-step process. First, you just identify your specific industry. Second, you review the disclosure topics that are relevant for that industry. Third, you select the specific metrics that apply to you. And finally, you consult the detailed technical protocols for extra guidance on how to report. Think of this as the SASB toolkit. The industry descriptions are there to help you pinpoint the right standard for your business. Then, the disclosure topics outline the key sustainability risks and opportunities you should be thinking about. The metrics give you the specifics on what and how to measure. And finally, the technical protocols are like the detailed how-to guide. It's really a complete package designed to make life easier for preparers. All right, theory is great, but let's make this real. We're going to do a quick practical walkthrough using a case study that comes directly from the IFRS S1 illustrative guidance, a regional airline. So let's meet our company. We'll call it Entity Y. And it's a regional passenger airline. This is a classic example of a small or medium-sized enterprise facing the exact same IFRS S1 requirements that you are. So, following that four-step process we just talked about, Entity Y first needs to identify its industry. It looks through the SASB industry descriptions and, not surprisingly, its business model aligns perfectly with the airline's SASB standard. Step 1, done. Easy enough. Next step, Entity Y needs to dig a little deeper into that standard. It reviews the disclosure topics, and given the nature of its business, it determines that accident and safety management is a really significant and applicable topic. This makes total sense, right? It's a material risk for any airline, and SASB helps them formally identify it. And this is where it gets really interesting. From that single topic, Entity Y is able to identify 3 specific, super relevant metrics to report on: a description of its safety management system, the number of aviation accidents, and any governmental enforcement actions. And just like that, the big general requirement of IFRS S1 becomes very concrete and very measurable. Okay, the airline example was pretty clean, but I know what some of you are thinking. What if my business is way more complex than that? Well, this next section is for you. Let's talk about handling complex business models where one standard just isn't going to cut it. For a more complex business, the approach obviously has to adapt.
A simple business, like our airline, can consult one primary SASB standard. But a complex business, let's say a conglomerate with all sorts of different activities, has to consult multiple SASB standards across its different sectors. It then has to pick and choose the relevant topics and metrics from each of those standards.
This leads to a really key judgment call: aggregation versus disaggregation. So that conglomerate might manage all of its supplier relationships from a central office, so it would make sense to aggregate that information. But something like product recall data is very specific to each sector, so it would disaggregate that information to give a clearer picture. The whole goal here is to avoid hiding or obscuring material information in a big jumble of data. Whew! We have covered a lot of ground. So let's bring it all together and boil it down into a simple compliance checklist. These are the key takeaways and actions for all of you preparers out there. So here it is, your 5-step action plan. Number 1, and this is the most important, acknowledge the mandate. Please remember, considering SASB is required. 2, identify your specific industry or industries. 3, select the topics and metrics that are actually relevant to your business. 4, apply and disclose, and make sure you state which standards you used. And finally, number 5, document your judgments, especially when you're making those complex decisions. This is your roadmap.
And that brings us to the final question I want to leave you with. This isn't just about ticking a compliance box. It's really about clear communication. So as you start this process, just ask yourself, are you prepared to tell your sustainability story with the kind of right, industry-specific data that investors are now demanding?